How are we doing? Most people here? Is that quite clear and comfortable? Not boomy or uncomfortable? Great. Well, it looks like we're 3 minutes early. That's fantastic. So, morning everybody, first of all. And very nice to be here with you. It's such a beautiful day and such a lovely place, isn't it? Did you all sleep well? Good. So, as you know, I'm going to talk this morning on the Gosho on attaining Buddhahood. This Gosho, as those of you know who've read the notes, was written to a person called Toki Jonin in 1255. That's an interesting point in itself, because 1255 was only 2 years, wasn't it, after the first declaration of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo by Nichiren Daishonin. 2 years after, in other words, the founding of the Nichiren Shoshu sect of Buddhism. And what is more, Toki Jonin was only shakubuku'd in 1254, one of the first shakubukus. Therefore, at the time this Gosho was written to him, he had only 1 year's practice. It's quite a thought, actually, because this is a very deep Gosho, incredibly profound, and Nichiren Daishonin chose to write this Gosho to Toki, who had just 1 year's practice. So in doing so, without a doubt, he knew that Toki Jonin would have to struggle with it to understand it. I'm quite sure, though of course there's nothing recorded to say so, that Toki Jonin must have read this Gosho over and over and over again. Not just when he first received it, but I guess most of his lifetime. And through that, of course, always succeeded in deepening and refreshing and reviving his faith. So, to all of us who have practiced a comparatively short number of years, we might remember that we've still, many of us, practiced more than Toki Jonin had when he'd received this. So if we don't understand it, that means we're not making enough effort to do so. So like all Gosho, one really does have to read it over and over and over again. Once, twice, 3 times, 5 times, before one even begins to get an inkling of understanding. We can read a Gosho and all we're reading is just the surface of it. Really, when Nichiren Daishonin wrote, every single word was meaningful. Literally every single word or character. So that is the way we have to read the Gosho. This is why it's necessary to read it many times, because to begin with, we just skim the surface. Then we begin to develop the habit of looking deeply at the meaning of each phrase and each sentence, gradually penetrating deeper and deeper and feeling its meaning deeper and deeper in our lives. So one of the greatest bits of guidance that was ever given to me in the first year of my practice was a Japanese man who said to me, don't forget that when you study, you're refreshing your eternal memory. So when he said that, I had to think about it a bit. But later I realized that this is so true. We all possess the Buddha state. All of us, therefore, understand deep in our life all these universal truths that Nichiren Daishonin taught. But because of the 3 poisons and the lower worlds working in us, our understanding, our wisdom is clouded and murky and hidden beneath the surface. Through study, we help to draw that eternal wisdom that exists in us out from deep in our lives into our minds. So when one reads the Gosho, really what you're trying to do is to connect what Nichiren Daishonin wrote, not just with one's mind, but with the depths of one's life, where one's Buddha wisdom lies. Then when the two meet, the Buddha wisdom starts to flow forth like a fountain. It like triggers it off. This is why sometimes when people, for example, are doing shakubuku to somebody else, when they've finished talking to that person, perhaps on the way home in the bus or something, rather they think, my gosh, was that me saying all those things? That's incredible. Or someone else will be sitting listening to someone with 3 months' practice talking to someone else about Buddhism, and they'll be astounded what that person's saying. This is because shakubuku, true, sincere shakubuku, can only be done in the Buddha state. Therefore, at that point of time, the Buddha state is open, and the wisdom of eternal life is flowing from that person. Though, of course, they hardly realize it themselves. So this is what study is for, to awaken one's eternal memory. It's worth thinking about it. That is the total difference between study in Buddhism and study as it's usually done, for example, in this college here. Totally different thing, isn't it? So now perhaps it's plainer why, when one's reading the Gosho, you've got to read it many times. It's got to be based on Daimoku, because you've got to penetrate below just that surface understanding in your mind to something very much deeper. So this, I believe, Nichiren Daishonin knew that Tokijonin would do. He was a faithful, eager follower with a seeking mind. And Nichiren Daishonin put his confidence and trust in him in writing this Gosho to him, just the same as he knew people who followed Tokijonin would also make the effort to really grasp it. Tokijonin was an official of the samurai government of Japan at that time. So he was quite an important, valuable person. As an official in the samurai government, he had some status, and therefore would be able to protect true Buddhism in the future, which is what he indeed did. And he received a lot of opposition and persecution in his life because he was a follower of Nichiren Daishonin, but he never flinched, and he always protected him to his maximum ability. So I think now I'll ask John to read through the whole Gosho, and then in the usual way we'll take it step by step, sentence by sentence.
On attaining Buddhahood. If you wish to free yourself from the sufferings of birth and death you have endured through eternity and attain supreme enlightenment in this lifetime, you must awaken to the mystic truth which has always been within your life. This truth is Myoho Renge Kyo. Chanting Myoho Renge Kyo will therefore enable you to grasp the mystic truth within you. Myoho Renge Kyo is the king of sutras, flawless in both letter and principle. Its words are the reality of life, and the reality of life is the mystic law, Myoho. It is called the mystic law because it explains the mutually inclusive relationship of life and all phenomena. That is why this sutra is the wisdom of all Buddhas. Life at each moment encompasses both body and spirit, and both self and environment of all sentient beings in every condition of life, as well as insentient beings, plants, sky and earth, on down to the most minute particles of dust. Life at each moment permeates the universe and is revealed in all phenomena. One awakened to this truth himself embodies this relationship. However, even though you chant and believe in Myoho Renge Kyo, if you think the law is outside yourself, you are embracing not the mystic law, but some inferior teaching. Inferior teachings means those other than this sutra, which are all provisional and transient. No provisional teaching leads directly to enlightenment, and without the direct path to enlightenment, you cannot attain Buddhahood, even if you practice lifetime after lifetime for countless aeons. Attaining Buddhahood in this lifetime is then impossible. Therefore, when you chant the mystic law and recite the Lotus Sutra, you must summon up deep conviction that Myoho Renge Kyo is your life itself. You must never seek any of Shakyamuni's teachings or the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the universe outside yourself. Your mastery of the Buddhist teachings will not relieve you of mortal sufferings in the least unless you perceive the nature of your own life. If you seek enlightenment outside yourself, any discipline or good deed will be meaningless. For example, a poor man cannot earn a penny just by counting his neighbor's wealth, even if he does so night and day. That is why Miao Lo states, unless one perceives the nature of his life, he cannot eradicate his evil karma. He means here that unless one perceives the nature of his life, his practice will become an endless, painful austerity. Miao Lo therefore condemns such students of Buddhism as non-Buddhist. He refers to the passage in the Makashikan. Although they study Buddhism, their views revert to those of non-Buddhists. Whether you chant the Buddha's name, recite the sutra, or merely offer flowers and incense, all your virtuous acts will implant benefits and good fortune in your life. With this conviction, you should put your faith into practice. For example, the Jomyo Sutra says the Buddha's enlightenment is to be found in human life, thus showing that common mortals can attain Buddhahood, and that the sufferings of birth and death can be transformed into nirvana. It further states that if the minds of the people are impure, their land is also impure. But if their minds are pure, then so is the land. There are not two lands, pure or impure, in themselves. The difference lies solely in the good or evil of our minds. It is the same with a Buddha and a common mortal. While deluded, one is called a common mortal, but once enlightened, he is called a Buddha. Even a tarnished mirror will shine like a jewel if it is polished. A mind which presently is clouded by illusions originating from the innate darkness of life is like a tarnished mirror, but once it is polished, it will become clear, reflecting the enlightenment of immutable truth. Arouse deep faith and polish your mirror night and day. How should you polish it? Only by chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. What then does Myo signify? It is simply the mysterious nature of our lives from moment to moment, which the mind cannot comprehend nor words express. When you look into your own mind at any moment, you perceive neither color nor form to verify that it exists. Yet you still cannot say it does not exist, for many differing thoughts continually occur to you. Life is indeed an elusive reality that transcends both the words and concepts of existence and non-existence. It is neither existence nor non-existence, yet exhibits the qualities of both. It is the mystic entity of the middle way that is the reality of all things. Myo is the name given to the mystic nature of life, and Ho to its manifestations. Renge, the lotus flower, symbolizes the wonder of this law. Once you realize that your own life is the mystic law, you will realize that so are the lives of all others. That realization is the mystic Kyo, or sutra. It is the king of sutras, the direct path to enlightenment, for it explains that the entity of our minds, from which spring both good and evil, is in fact the entity of the mystic law. If you have deep faith in this truth and chant Myoho Renge Kyo, you are certain to attain Buddhahood in this lifetime. That is why the sutra states, after my death, you must embrace this sutra. Those who do so shall travel the straight road to Buddhahood. Never doubt in the slightest, but keep your faith and attain enlightenment in this lifetime. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Respectfully, Nichiren.
Thank you very much, John. So, this is truly a magnificent Gosho, isn't it? And it's hard to imagine what Toki Jonin must have felt when he received this amazing letter from Nichiren Daishonin himself. So, before we get into the body of the Gosho, I'd just like to talk for a little while about the title, On Attaining Buddhahood. As you know, in Buddhism, in all Buddhist teachings, the title contains everything. And this term, On Attaining Buddhahood, is really sort of quite casual, isn't it? On attaining Buddhahood, on taking a walk down the road, on coming to Ruskin College for a summer course. And that's what it's meant to be. On attaining Buddhahood, something that is within the potential of every human being. In another Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin says attaining Buddhahood is nothing extraordinary, nothing requiring superhuman powers, just a state of life, albeit the highest state of human life, which everyone, if they like to set about it and understand how to approach it, can achieve. So, Buddhahood is something that is part of this world, part of daily life. So, of course, our whole concept of Buddhahood is distorted by the distortions that have occurred since Shakyamuni Buddha died 3,000 years ago. Exactly as Shakyamuni predicted, after about 1,000 years, his teachings were distorted and twisted by human beings. And as you know, he then predicted that people would start building statues of himself and worshipping those, great stupas and temples, and put greater importance to those statues and temples than to the teachings themselves. Even to this day, we who don't live in a Buddhist country, nevertheless our image of Buddhahood is distorted because of this. From the earliest childhood, we're brought up at school and at home, and we see pictures of golden Buddhas and emerald Buddhas, huge Buddhas, small Buddhas, laughing Buddhas, fat Buddhas, every sort of Buddha in every sort of pose, but all of them somehow amazingly almost superhuman in their power, in their tranquility, or in their enlightened features, or in the majesty of their particular pose. So our mind and the minds of everybody is distorted by this, even to this very day. Whereas Buddhahood, in fact, is, as I said earlier, a state of human life, a natural state, albeit one which one has to make great effort to reach. So, in Shakyamuni's own day, when he taught the Lotus Sutra, which stated for the first time that Buddhahood existed in everybody, he knew and said at that time that people wouldn't really understand it. The simple people who lived in those days, 3,000 years ago, could never believe that they could attain the same life state as this amazing prince and mystic, this incredibly handsome, wise person called Shakyamuni. Of course they couldn't possibly understand it. Their minds hadn't got the capacity to do so. But as the years and hundreds and thousands of years have passed by, of course man's intellectual capacity has expanded hugely through all forms of education, even through the world getting smaller through communication. People have been able to open and broaden their minds. So today it's possible, with perhaps our conceited minds, in a way, to begin to believe that perhaps we too can become Buddha. But even us today find it difficult sometimes to talk about. I believe in the history of NSUK, short as it is, that it's only recently, in the last perhaps year or two or three, that people have begun to say openly and overtly, what I'm practicing Buddhism for is to become a Buddha, or to attain the state of Buddhahood. Before that, people tended to be bewildered. Can I really reach this incredible state? Still the image of Shakyamuni and his golden statue was in their mind. But I believe nowadays people are beginning to talk more naturally about what they're practicing for, which is to attain Buddhahood. Don't you think? And that's great. And I really hope that in this course as well, you discuss it between you naturally, your experiences of Buddhahood. So we experience Buddhahood even now, every single day that passes, though often we can't believe it or can't recognize it. So what actually is happening to one's life when one is in the state of Buddha? And remember, Nichiren Daishonin said, the moment you sit down in front of the Gonzen and begin to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo or recite the Lotus Sutra, you are in Buddhahood, he said. So this means, too, that when you get up from in front of your Butsudan, some of that Buddhahood must still be revealed in your life. It couldn't just close down like a clam. So, theoretically speaking, the theory of the 10 worlds teaches that whatever world or basic state of life you're in, from hell to Buddhahood, will affect every other area of your life. That is to say, all the other 9 worlds will be drawn through that world which is in the supreme position at that particular moment. So if one is in the state of anger, still all the other worlds exist in anger, but they're drawn through the state of anger before they appear manifested in one's life. So, of course, when you're in the state of Buddha, the other worlds also still exist, but the expression of those other worlds, of animality, anger, hunger, and so on, appears through the Buddha state. And in the process of being drawn through the Buddha state, it turns 180 degrees from something negative or even destructive to something incredibly positive and valuable. So this theory, which is called the 10 worlds, the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, is a very important one. In other words, even in the Buddha, hell exists. And in hell, Buddha exists. Unless this theory were true, the Buddha couldn't be a human being, could he? He'd be something separate from human life. The greatness of Buddhism is that it denies nothing in one's life, good or bad. They're all contained in that theory of the 10 worlds and the mutual possession of the 10 worlds. So let me try and give you an example now of what happens in one's daily life when Buddhahood becomes the main tendency. For a moment, perhaps only. Perhaps for 5 minutes, perhaps for a whole morning, or a whole afternoon, or even for 2 days, Buddhahood becomes one's main tendency. And of course, the longer one practices, provided one's really doing the 3 practices, the more Buddhahood becomes the main tendency of one's life for 24 hours a day. So taking each world, if one is in the state of Buddha, even the slightest glimpse of hell, or the slightest touch of hell's icy fingers, or hot fingers, or smelly fingers, whatever sort of hell it is, but even a touch of it will be enough to force oneself immediately back into Buddhahood. That is the reaction of the state of hell when one's Buddha state is the main tendency. The other way hell can be used in the state of Buddha is to help to feel someone else's suffering. For one moment, someone tells their tale of sufferings to a person in the Buddha state, and that person in the Buddha state can relate to the sufferings of that person in hell. And through relating to them, they don't plunge in head first, but they can put in a hand and help pull them out of it, because they can feel it for a moment or two just as that other person can feel it. That is how the state of hell, I believe, appears within the main tendency of Buddhahood, and how it can be used. In other words, the existence of hell, even in a Buddha, is a constant driving force for him to remain a Buddha. A Buddha is a human being. Unless he's chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, unless he's aware of his other 9 worlds, he'd never last as a Buddha very long. Now, hunger. Hunger in the Buddha can be, for example, a yearning for Kosen Rufu. This is hunger in the state of Buddha. A constant yearning, a constant desire to see a peaceful, happy world. And, of course, to see himself and others taking action to create such a world. The yearning in the state of hunger of a Buddha. And then animality. Animality, as you know, is an instinctive world. The world in which a mother will suddenly grab and save their child from falling onto a fire. The instinctive world of animality. The world in which the animal instinct preserves us as a species instinctively. It's the same when Buddha is in the ascendancy in one's life. One's instinct is always to preserve oneself so that one can fulfill one's purpose in life to the full. When you're in the state of Buddha, many of you will have experienced it. You find yourself taking more care of yourself than before, being more aware of what you're eating maybe, and that you're eating good food, or that you're sleeping enough, or that if you're really exhausted, you rest for a bit. This is the wisdom of the Buddha, isn't it? Working instinctively through the state of animality to preserve you as an individual so you can fulfill your mission. Anger becomes passion. Without passion, no one could ever achieve Causton. No one without passion can achieve anything remarkable, I believe. So the passion for Causton, such a driving force for a peace of this world and for justice, arises through the Buddha state from the world of anger. And then what about tranquility? Tranquility to a person in the Buddha state is a time to rest mind and body so that one can generate the energy to continue with the great task of living a fulfilling and valuable life. Tranquility, in other words, is used by a person in the state of Buddha to prepare themselves for another great leap forward, another great effort. Rapture. Rapture, as you know, is a passing joy. Unfortunately, a state of life that one rarely stays in for very long. Because in rapture, we tend to be stupid and not to look where we're going and fall into all sorts of traps. But for the Buddha, rapture, is a passing joy, which very quickly turns into gratitude. Gratitude is not rapture, is it? But gratitude is a wonderful feeling. Rapture arises when you've attained a victory in something or you've achieved your desire. So with a person with the Buddha state in ascendancy, that turns quickly to gratitude, and from gratitude to a determination to achieve even more. So this is where rapture, well, the way rapture works in the state of Buddhahood. Then learning to master some subject, some area of knowledge or a craft. This is in order to establish oneself in a position in society which is valuable and from which one can create the greatest influence for the good of others, for the happiness of others around one. And absorption or partial enlightenment is the power to concentrate on some particular aspect in order to teach others, and in order, of course, first to master it oneself. And finally, of those 9 worlds, Bodhisattva, I think, almost speaks for itself, doesn't it? Bodhisattva is the world where Buddhahood expresses itself most fully in the desire to help others and to change society for the better. So I hope those examples give you an idea of how the Buddha state is working through those other 9 worlds, or rather, those other worlds working through the Buddha state. It's nothing extraordinary, is it? The only thing that's extraordinary is to be able to sustain it. And of course, it's through the 3 practices and the great effort we make to do them that we become able to sustain that type of positive, valuable action all the time. So equally so, of course, if every one of our 10 worlds is so positive, then everything in our environment reacts positively to all of those worlds. Therefore, for the Buddha, or for the person who has Buddhahood as the main tendency of their life, everything in the environment becomes a Shoten Zenjin. Shoten Zenjin, I think all of you know, meaning a force for value. A forces of the universe that exist around us and within us, always working for value, in harmony, to support. This is the way the environment reacts to Buddhahood. Once Mr. Izumi, that very down-to-earth man, vice president of the Soka Gakkai, said even in the state of Buddhahood, even one's wife's nagging sounds like music in your ears, he said. So in this Gosho, apart from its marvelous title, which is so meaningful, Nichiren Daishonin really, first of all, explains the workings of life. And then he points out vigorously that there is no difference between a Buddha and a human being, except that the Buddha happens to be enlightened. And then he talks about how to practice to become a Buddha. And finally, having stated, of course, that the fundamental practice is to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, he then explains the meaning of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So now let's have a look at the Gosho bit by bit, and we'll have a break in the middle of doing this so that you can stretch your legs and get a breather.
If you wish to free yourself from the sufferings of birth and death you have endured through eternity and attain supreme enlightenment in this lifetime, you must awaken to the mystic truth which has always been within your life. This truth is Myoho Renge Kyo. Chanting Myoho Renge Kyo will therefore enable you to grasp the mystic truth within you.
Thank you. So, you all understand, I think, the four sufferings. The four sufferings which all the Buddhas have set out to discover the reason for them and to eliminate them. That is to say, the suffering of birth into this troubled world, sickness, and old age, and death. And as you know, there's the famous story of Shakyamuni, who went out from his palace 4 times and left the city, each time by a different gate. And at each gate, he saw one of these 4 sufferings. In the form, first of all, of a woman giving birth to a baby. And secondly, someone who was sick. Thirdly, someone who was very old. And finally, he saw a corpse. And all of Shakyamuni's efforts when he left his palace and went out into the forest were in order to discover why mankind is born into this world to suffer in this way. Nichiren Daishonin did exactly the same thing. When he was born, Japan was in the midst of incredible suffering. We've talked about a lot in these lectures on the Risho Ankokuron. But his whole purpose was to discover why sufferings were necessary and how to overcome them, and to give the people a means in their daily life to do so. He says here, if you're to overcome these sufferings, you must awaken to the mystic truth which has always been within one's life. Eternally, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo has existed within us and within everything that has life. The rhythm or energy or law of life itself. Of course it must exist, mustn't it, within us. So I often mention this professor at London University, Professor Bohm, who Miss Hubbard, sitting at the back there, knows very well. But he understands totally that there are 2 energies in man or woman. One he calls a mechanical energy, the energy that moves your fingers and your eyes and your muscles and so on. And the other, an energy which he could only describe as universal. The energy of the universe, if it exists in the universe, must exist in the human being also. then his great question mark is, why can't human beings use it? It must be there. How can it be triggered off? So there he is, a physicist, desperately trying to work out, through physics, how he can teach both himself and others to use this universal energy for their own benefit. So we can say to him, Miss Hubbard said to him, you just chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. But as a physicist, this isn't enough, is it? He must prove it by physics. Just to be told he can chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo isn't for him. His point of view is not proving anything. So he's very difficult to shakabuku, isn't he, Miss Hubbard? But even so, one can't help but admire his determination and his seeking mind. Maybe one day he'll get there in the area. I hope so. But we know, because the Buddha taught us, that if we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam meaning devoting our whole lives to putting ourselves in rhythm or in harmony with this amazing force, then we shall go with it. I'll open up our lives and move with that force, instead of being hemmed in and running off the tram line. Chanting Myoho Renge Kyo will therefore enable you to grasp the mystic truth within you. This is the key, isn't it? Nam. Chanting Myoho Renge Kyo, which is, if you like, the way life can be described in so few characters or words. And if we Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, then we shall be moving with the rhythm and the force of that amazing energy, the energy of life itself. So the sound of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, in other words, can draw this force from us, can draw Buddhahood out of our lives. This is why Kyo of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is so important. That sound that goes out from you and back into you is what draws Buddhahood up. After all, beautiful music can do amazing things, can't it, to one's inner life. And horrible music can do horrible things to it. This is a fact, isn't it? Why should it be strange, therefore, that a sound should not bring or have that amazing effect on one's life? Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. This is a fact. Sounds can have incredible effects deep within us. And of course, the more it's drawn up by that sound, the more our minds can begin to actually see it. And therefore, Buddhahood and the glimpses we get of it become more and more a reality in our lives. This causes us to view life with a totally different dimension, doesn't it? What seemed before impossible becomes possible. What was an obstacle, we know we can overcome. So gradually, by that discovery, we're already dispersing sufferings, aren't we? We know, of course, that they're sufferings. For a moment, maybe they cause us pain. But once you know you can always overcome them, then the sufferings, the agony of it, begins to disappear and instead becomes a challenge. Nichiren Daishonin in another Gosho described it like a caged bird. Do you remember? The bird in the cage that calls out desperately. And all the wild birds, the free birds, come and gather round the cage. And the bird makes one last colossal effort and manages to squeeze itself through the bars and get away. This is like our voice calling out Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which causes the bird, the Buddha state in us, to rise up and struggle and break through that clutter of karma and poison which exists in every one of us. until it's free. So this is why he says, if you wish to free yourself at the beginning in this first life, this is what we're doing every time we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. We're freeing the Buddha state. So at one time, people used to think freeing yourself of sufferings meant being able to go and sit on a mountaintop and meditate. In other words, purely and simply escaping from this world. But even on a mountaintop, of course, they discovered they still suffer. They can still get colds and flu. They can still feel irritable sometimes when they get up in the morning. The sufferings still go on. So it's not sitting on a mountaintop, escaping from this